Today out in the comments, I want to hear about the last time you slept on a movie. You were like, oh yeah, that sounds great, or I've heard that's great, and then you didn't see it for years and years and years. Then you finally saw it. The last time that you finally saw a movie you slept on, and you were like, wow, I was really wrong for not seeing this movie earlier. This movie's great. This movie's a classic. Hello, I'm Adam Caesar. This is Project Black T-Shirt, the channel where we take at least one new or reissue horror movie and then pair them with a book that you might enjoy if you like that movie. Be sure to like this video and subscribe if you want to see more videos like it, and as always, stick around to the end of the episode when we're going to do a book recommendation. Today we're going to be talking about two bigger new releases from Arrow Video, Alice, Sweet Alice by Alfred and William Friedkin's Cruising, starring Al Pacino. These are two films that have outstanding reputations, and two films until last week I had not seen ever. So these are a hell of a good way to see these movies. As I always do, I will put the links to buy these down in the description. There's Amazon, and then there's our friends at Diabolic DVD who will make sure that because these are both slip-cased, they will get to you in pristine condition because they are movie collectors themselves. First, we're going to talk about Alice, Sweet Alice. This is directed by Alfred in 1976, and it's interesting because it's kind of billed as a proto-slasher, as an American giallo. I kind of wouldn't use those qualifiers. This is 2 years after Bob Clark's Black Christmas. It is 2 years before John Carpenter's Halloween, and that's early. It's an early slasher, but I would still call it a slasher movie, just because it is exceptionally well made, and just because it doesn't adhere to the structure of the slasher movie, on a one-to-one basis as it becomes codified later in the Friday the 13th sequels and things like that. I still think it's almost a little bit distancing and a little bit pretentious to not call this a slasher movie, because I think it definitely is. But like I said, it is a damn good one. This is one of those movies where it's like, well, how many more classic movies are there? How many more great movies are there in this genre from this era that I haven't seen? It's this like the movie that kind of gets me reflecting on that question as I kind of fill in the back catalog of films that other horror fans hold up as great films. I kind of get worried at a certain point that I'm going to see everything. And when Arrow keeps putting out releases like this and keeps putting out movies like this, I'm a little bit assured, like, okay, maybe I'm never going to see everything, and there's always going to be something fun to surprise me. Not to say that Alice, Sweet Alice is necessarily fun. It was released under a couple alternate titles. The intended title, Alfred Soul's intended title, was Communion, and this release has the title card that says Communion across it. It was also released as Holy Terror, which is also probably a better title than Alice, Sweet Alice. Alice, Sweet Alice doesn't exactly give you the premise, because this is a movie about the terrors of being a Catholic, of growing up Catholic in certain ways. It's filmed in Paterson, New Jersey, where Soul had made an earlier film, got him in a little bit of trouble, and it is filmed all over. Like, the location shooting is wonderful, the period location shooting. It is beautifully photographed and has a very interesting style to how it's put together, very deliberate, very editorially focused. It starts out with the murder of a young Brooke Shields, and the suspicion is cast on her sister. The sister's in this dysfunctional family, a child of divorce. The father comes back into town to try to stay with the family until dreadful business with the murder has been sorted out. But the murders keep happening, and she keeps being kind of, is she being framed? Is she not? Is she complicit in these murders? Wears this really creepy kind of transparent mask, the killer. But it has several standout, very scary, very creepy sequences. As I said, wonderful cinematography, wonderful, really naturalistic performances, especially from like the younger people. Like, kid actors are usually hit or miss. It's incredibly dense, incredibly tense, and in some places like really kind of cruel and mean. But it has just a mind melter of an ending. This is a movie that I'd always kind of seen. I know what the slasher looks like. I know that mask and the raincoat, and I'd always just kind of assumed, okay, early slasher movie. no one really told me how good this movie was, and I feel like I owe some of my friends some angry texts. But this is an incredible movie. The new edition of this, it's got a ton of featurettes. It has a Locations Then and Now featurette with Mike Gingold, which I think is really, really good. And it's kind of sad because it shows you how few of these locations are left standing. It's just him standing in like like a municipal building and be like, well, this used to be the church, or this used to be the X, this used to be the Y. But it's really kind of a fun feature. The director's very involved with this release, and his recollections and his interviews are really nice. He's a working production designer. He works on a ton of kind of hour-long network TV shows, so he's clearly very successful in that part of his career. He directed, I believe 4 films. One was Tanya's Island. It's just, you see this movie and you're like, wow, I wish we had there would been some kind of trajectory where Alfred Soul became like the American Argento, because this is an incredibly tense movie, incredibly well put together, just really, really awesome. And in the interviews, he talked about the influence of Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now, which is a movie I love. It's one of my favorite films. But to bill it as like, oh, this is like an American Don't Look Now, or this is inspired by Don't Look Now, kind of really does undersell those slasher elements, because Don't Look Now is a very meditative and very contemplative film that has a very memorable burst of violence and has a very kind of sad opening to it. It has some creepy stuff in between. Alice, Sweet Alice, as I said, I don't really 100%. I see the influence. I see where Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now is kind of a touchstone for this film, as are several other artier films. But this is a full-blooded horror movie. This is a full-blooded slasher, and I really think anyone who's maybe kept it at arm's length or hasn't checked it out because of the way Arrow is marketing it, because of the way they're talking about this release, this is one of the best discs of the year, if not my favorite one. And another film that I clearly know the name of, I've clearly heard about. This is Cruising by William Friedkin, and it's, when the title card comes up, it is William Friedkin's Cruising. This is the director of The Exorcist, of The French Connection. This is not lesser Friedkin. I believe because this film is so notorious, and because it deals with a subject matter that meat and potatoes genre fan, they're not ready to kind of hang with. It is about the early 80s, 1980 gay scene in New York, and particularly the kind of leather bar scene. But it is Al Pacino going undercover in this scene because people are being murdered. Kind of has like a very almost Silence of the Lambs feel to it, where it's in its intensity, in its murder sequences, is kind of full bore horror movie. Some of the more disturbing murders I feel like I've seen in a film like this, but it is that kind of police procedural to a certain extent, mystery movie. Paul Sorvino plays his boss. Karen Allen plays his girlfriend. Joe Spinell shows up for a few scenes to be very, very creepy and very memorable. But this is a movie that if you're a fan of 80s New York, if you're a fan of kind of the films that don't shy away from showing grit and grime and upsettingness, Cruising is a classic. It's a movie that I feel like I just saw last week, and I'm ready to watch it again, even though it's challenging and it's kind of grueling at times, and it's incredibly prescient. It feels very modern for being made in 1980. You kind of you see the things on screen, you see the things that they're dealing with, how these lifestyles are usually depicted in films of the era, and even films as recently as 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and you're just amazed that William Friedkin, I guess at the time, had the largesse to just be like, no, this is the movie I'm going to make, and we're going to put one of the biggest movie stars in the world in it, and it's going to be very uncompromising. And he claims on the special features and in interviews that it is, the Hitchcock style of, like, it's not as graphic as you think it is. It kind of tricks you into thinking it's more graphic than it is by quick cuts and subliminal editing and things like that. It's still a pretty graphic, grueling film that raises a lot of really dark psychological questions, especially towards the end. but it's also just a fascinating murder mystery. It's a fascinating way to put together a mystery film where ostensibly, you know, you get somewhat closure, you get some closure, but in some ways you don't in others, and it makes you think like, well, what's the point of it all? Like, it's a real quasi downer of a film. But I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't seen it. But I will say, if you haven't seen Cruising, or if the reputation of the film and how notorious it's kind of become, I really do recommend, if you are a fan of William Friedkin's output. This is a great director at the absolute top of his game. It's immaculately constructed and wonderfully cast and wonderfully acted, and the cinematography is incredible. Jack Nitzsche does the soundtrack. The score is super unsettling and really incredible. But if you think you can hang with it, Cruising, the new Arrow edition of this is unbelievable. As I said, there's two commentaries. One's new, one's archival. There's two longer, pretty meaty featurettes that are holdovers, but they're almost like, I think they're like a half hour each, so it's like an hour of making of stuff. And the transfer itself is 4K, beautiful. Look, the movie looks amazing. It looks like it was made yesterday. There's not a spot on it. I don't know how they did this and how they made this film look like it does. It just looked amazing. But hell of a movie. Hell of two movies. I really enjoyed my time with both of these films. For this week's book recommendation, I want to talk about something that last week I talked about, the Universal Monsters board game Horrified, and it would have been a great time to talk about Mallory O'Meara's the Lady from the Black Lagoon. But the second I turned off the camera after talking about Mark Sieber's book, I was like, I should have kept Mark Sieber's book for next week and just talked about the Lady from the Black Lagoon. But this is a kind of biography about Millicent Patrick, who was not given credit, was not given proper credit, but was instrumental in designing the look of the Creature from the Black Lagoon. It is a really interesting approach to biography, because it's a biography where Mallory O'Meara is almost a character. She's basically writing her own story about making the book and building the book as a woman creative in the horror field, and kind of the pushback that she's received and the sexism she's faced, as she's like, okay, I sold this book proposal, so now I have to write about Millicent Patrick. And she kind of almost alternates between, here's me writing the book and here's how I researched it, and then she presents these chapters that are about Millicent Patrick's life. She had worked at Disney. She'd done all this very interesting things in Hollywood, and had a very interesting background, and like lived at Hearst Castle as a child. All this different stuff about Millicent Patrick's life, kind of running parallel with how the book is written and researched and presented. Very interesting read. If you enjoy the Universal Monsters, especially if you enjoy The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which I very much do. Very illuminating read. Very interesting, and really a quick read, because it's not a hyper dense biography. It's not like you don't get too slogged down in the details. You just get enough of the different periods of Patrick's life to get a real whole picture of who she was and what her contribution was to horror. I'm Adam Caesar. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to find out more about me or my books, I write novels, novellas, sometimes comic books, and screenplays when they let me. You can sign up for my mailing list, and I will send you a free short story, couple free short stories, a free novel sample. And thank you very much for everyone who's picked up the books, who's reviewed the books on Amazon, who's talked about the books, who's told their friends. I really, really, really appreciate it. It really helps me out. And it really helps keep this channel going and keep the reviews pouring in, which I will see you next week.